another video. Today we are taking a quick look at another game on the list of games that I've been wanting to do a little bit of performance tests on, as well as specific settings guides. There's a couple games here that are interesting to run, and this is one of them, which is Sunset Overdrive. It runs particularly well across a lot of different platforms, but there are some unique things that you can do to make the experience just a hair better. So I just wanted to go over some of those opportunities in this video today. This might be a bit of a longer one because it is one of my favorite games, and I want to make sure to cover it as well as I can. So starting off, we're going to go and look at turbo mode and what kind of settings we want to have. The thing about Sunset Overdrive is there aren't a lot of settings to tweak. There is pretty much just a couple visual features to toggle on and off, which aren't super performance impacty, and resolution. So between those two things, that's what we're going to be playing with. But out of the box, if you're at the turbo mode on 30 watts, which is plugged in, you're going to have a very good experience at around 60 to 70 FPS on a regular basis. I am at one of the highest points in the game, just so I could show you, it's not the highest, but one of the highest points in the game, show you what it looks like when we have a ton on-screen rendering. It gets a little bit more hectic when you start fighting people, but you're going to still stay right around 60 FPS on a regular basis with dips down into the 50s. One thing I will mention is without the performance settings on, I'd never be able to tell on this screen for the most part, except for the stutters, which there are a few in this game, because of the variable refresh rate, and it's staying inside that 48 hertz to 60 hertz window, or 120 hertz window. So for the most part, this looks incredible on the screen. There are a couple settings we'll go over, including one in Command Center that I think is one that you guys should be using in most of your games when running at 1080p settings. Honestly, even 720p, I prefer it over RSR in those situations, especially when you have access to FSR, which you don't in this game, so that is something we'll talk about. First off, let's go to the options. Biggest thing that you're going to want to do is come into video and decide what your display resolution is going to be. This is set to full screen, but it's sort of an exclusive full screen, but not really. Anti-aliasing, there's not much difference between SMAA and SMAA 2X, which are the two options here. So I'd say just keep it on SMAA. It'll save you some performance, and frankly, it's better than an untreated image. So I do that. So 1080p is what we're currently rocking on the turbo mode. Here we have video settings. We're going to want to make sure that frame rate throttle is unlimited. I don't particularly love frame rate capping unless I'd rather do it via TDP. But if you are really trying to hit a very smooth, consistent frame rate, so you'll see at some of those lower power settings, we may want to lock it to 30, and that gives us the option there. Anisotropic filtering, I've just left it auto. You have bilinear, bicubic. Neither of them are very good. They're very limited. We have bloom, depth of field, motion blur, SSAO, film grain, and fog, which are all very, more visual features than they are performance features that you can disable. I'm sure depth of field would impact some situations. I'm turning off motion blur for now, but I actually like the implementation of motion blur in this game. So the only reason I'm keeping it off is because we're running at a pretty stable 60. If you are running on an external monitor that doesn't have VRR or anything like that, and you're not running at 60 locked, I'm going to turn that back on. So for right now, that's our settings that we have. The last feature that I would recommend enabling, just to make it look like a very, very sharp, clean image, is go in here and go to AMD RIS. This is different than AMD RSR, which you can see I've put down a little bit further because I don't like it as much. It's very finicky and hard to get enabled in games. With AMD RIS, the only thing you have to do is be running the game and have it enabled when you start it. Like, that's pretty much it. As long as you have it enabled from the beginning, you can turn it off and on in game all you want. So here's what the image looks like without RIS. You can see it just becomes significantly less sharp. I didn't mean to fall, but we're gonna rock with it anyway. Yeah, and with it enabled, we basically just get a Vaseline smear removed. So we're gonna go ahead and turn it back on. The one thing you will notice, you'll get more aliasing. In a game like this where it doesn't have a very good anti-aliasing technique, that's going to be your preference. I would say on the actual screen of the Asus ROG Ally, it looks significantly better with the RIS enabled. It's a subtle effect, but it is a meaningful effect. So I would highly recommend that we do this to get the best experience you can on this device. So that's what we're doing with turbo mode. Let's go ahead and go into our options and start with performance mode, the next step down in power level. First, we're gonna have to deal with some of the boosting that it does, which basically puts it at 25 watts, which means you're not gonna see almost any effect on performance. This is where I might start considering enabling that motion blur back on, because we will get dips down into the 40s, but they're going to be 40 to 50 at 1080p, and that is still totally playable on this display. It looks really good. The stutters still affect this mode as well. So we're going to go in here, we're going to re-enable motion blur for this one. So I would say the only change you're making for this, for performance mode, is put motion blur back on. I tend to prefer it. It does, you know, hurt the visual clarity in the image a little bit, but it also smooths out those experiences. And you can see we're dipping down into the 39s to 40s, which you will feel those, but with motion blur, it definitely makes it easier to deal with and less of a problem. And when that wattage does dip down to 15 after about 2 minutes of being in performance mode, you will notice a little bit of a drop in performance, but not a dramatic one. Now, there is one other profile that we can use to get this running quite well with a pretty major change in order for us to get more battery life. So we're going to first switch to the power profile of silent. I'm not going to go to my custom one yet, just to show you how much of an impact starving the power on this device can have in certain games. So right here, we're down at 10 watts, 11 watts is what it's reporting, but it will be down to 10 watts. Yep, there we go. And we're at 17 FPS, which is just unplayable. It's an incredible mess. It makes you feel kind of nauseous to play it. So I wouldn't recommend it. Even on even the ROG Ally screen is not going to be a savior here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and see if we can get playable frame rates by messing with the display resolution. So I believe 720p is not going to be enough in this game to get playable frame rates on silent mode. Did that change? It did change. And as you can see, we are still having serious issues. It's a little more consistent, but it's still not even at 30 FPS. So we're going to go even further. And this is one of the few games where you can go down as low as 480p. We're going to go down to 576p and see what we can do. Can we keep this at a locked 30 FPS? Not even there. So we are still at 25 FPS. However, the vast run of play is going to be a lot more manageable. Let's get down to more like traditional experiences. And you can see silent mode is just a no-go on this game, really. There's just too much that impacts performance here. Although now that we're down on the ground, we're doing a little bit better. We're definitely more closely holding to 30 FPS. This would be playable for the most part, but we're still going to be struggling. 10 watts will get us a lot of battery life, but not a particularly great experience. This might be the first time where I would say, let's go ahead and lock it at 30 FPS and see if we can hold that number for a while. But even as you can see, we're not going to consistently do it. It's definitely not the most ideal situation right now to be playing here. So let's go ahead and go to my custom power profile, which is the way I would play this if I was on handheld mode and at a 720p resolution. Let me go get back to a decent place to actually benchmark, because right now we're getting better performance than we actually would in standard gameplay. Oh no, I'm absolutely screwing up today. We're going on back. It's the big city that really kills it. You can see we're GPU starved. And this is one thing about the Ally that I hope that they resolve with future updates, is give me more control of the TDP. Right now, I don't need this much CPU I think we could lock CPU to 800 megahertz, give the rest of the power to the GPU, and be running at a very consistent frame rate. But right now, it does not allow me to do that. And you're gonna see the switch that happens from 10 to 13 watts that makes all of the difference. So we're going up to 13 watts, not quite 15 watts, which it will show 15 watts for a second, for a little bit. So we're gonna have to wait and play around with it for a bit. Immediately, we get well over double the performance just by going to 13 watts and not starving our APU. You can see our GPU starting to now overclock, which is exactly what we needed out of it. We got a little bit more out of the CPU, which is great, but you can see our GPU is also starting to overclock as well, which is what we needed. We were just starving it a little too much. Now, we're still at that really low resolution that I wouldn't prefer to play at. So we're going to go to 720p and see what we can do to get a playable frame rate. And as you can see, at 14 or 13 watts, we're getting a very playable frame rate with just minor stutters, which exist on everything. So we're down in 40s at times, but as we get into regular play, you're going to see we're going to stay up around 60 for a lot of the run, which is amazing. That is the difference between 13 watts and 10 watts on the Asus ROG Ally. Now, I've done some testing and I've found that the sweet spot seems to be 13 watts in the current way that power is handled on the device. I do believe that they could get more out of this device if they would allow more granular modification to the power profiles inside of the ROG Ally. So highly recommend you try out and add a custom power profile at 13 watts, because as you can see, we are getting significantly better performance than we were getting before at the 10 watt range. Cool. So those are my power profiles and recommended settings. 720p is for the 13 watt range, 576p or 480p for the 10 watt silent range, or don't play it at all is my recommendation actually. Or you can go up to performance or even beyond at 1080p with turbo mode and performance mode, and you're not going to have too much of an impact. You can even turn off motion blur when you're all the way up at turbo mode. So highly recommend you check this game out. If you've never played Sunset Overdrive, it's a fantastic game. One of my favorite games from Insomniac, probably second to Spider-Man, and Ratchet & Clank is third right behind that, which is coming out very soon on Steam, and I can't fucking wait. So make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, and as always, stay classy, coders.